Hello, Don Mancini. How you doing?
I'm well. How are you? I'm admiring all of these posters on your wall. You're a David Lynch fan because I see Blue Velvet and Lost Highway. I see Nightmare 2. Is that Halloween 2?
Yeah, good
Yes.
spot. You actually, and you can't see it because it's actually above, but there are some Chucky posters up there as
Oh,
well. So he's
sure.
up
Yeah,
there, I
yeah,
promise.
yeah. I love Halloween 2.
Oh, what a film!
I think it's
Yeah,
kind of underrated, actually.
it is. It
And we
is.
have a couple of Halloween 2 homages in the season of TV.
Oh wow, I love
Is it
that.
like episode 4? I think you only seen the first two?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, episode 4 takes place largely at a hospital.
Hmm.
So we do a little bit of a Halloween 2 thing there. And I'm also like a fan of Stuart Gordon's dolls, of course.
Oh, fantastic, right? And actually, that's interesting. One of the first things I was going to ask you, right? It does seem like right now, the week I've had has been very focused on a new Halloween movie, a trailer for a new Scream movie. We've got Chucky back. We've got an I Know What You Did Last Summer TV show about to start. We've got a new Hellraiser film, a new Texas Chainsaw film in the pipeline. Why do you think that right now all of our sort of favorite horror properties are returning? Is there a reason for that?
Well, I think, we nostalgia is always a very powerful impulse, particularly when, we're going through difficult times. And of course, the whole world is the last couple of years has gone through unprecedentedly difficult times, or at least unprecedented our lifetimes. I think that's part of it. So I think it's just a human impulse to look back to the past for kind of comfort.
Hmm.
Although it's like when you really think about it, were the 80s so rosy after all?
Yeah.
And, I mean, as a gay man, that the AIDS crisis was terrible at that time. I lost a lot of friends. So I don't want to personally return to the 80s. I'm happy with a lot of the ways that the world has evolved. But, yeah, I think it's partly nostalgia, and I think it's also partly much more business driven, frankly. I think that, the corporations who make content, they're wanting to hedge their bets by hedging their bets with IP and thinking
Yeah.
that, that's what they increasingly want to invest in. But fortunately, I have my own IP, and fortunately, I one of the things I love creatively about sequels, I think the challenge of reinventing an established character and story and universe, I find that extremely interesting.
Yeah.
The combination of having to satisfy a desire for what has come before, but bringing something new simultaneously to justify its presence. So anyway, I think those are the reasons why we're seeing these things pop up. But as with we're all challenged with making it fresh and justifying coming back.
Well, I love
So
that. I think that's one of the reasons why Chucky is one of my favorite horror franchises, is because you do such a good job at keeping it fresh compared to a lot of those
thank
others
you.
we mentioned. Like, I think that every Chucky film not just is a very different story, but almost a different little genre in its own right,
Yeah.
right? And was that something that you were very consciously trying to do, I suppose, with these different sequels across different generations?
Absolutely. That was always my conscious goal. And I was always supported in that by my, producer who's produced all of the iterations, David Kirshner. It's important to both of us. And I think that we both feel that's one of the things that has helped our longevity is reinventing it. We started in the slasher genre, then we turned it into comedy. Then
Mm,
with Curse, we came back to sort of gothic horror. And now we're ringing what is, one of our biggest reinventions, which is just taking it into a different medium.
mm.
And it's just a completely different kind of storytelling. Whereas a 90-minute movie is a certain kind of story, whereas this is a completely different kind of canvas where you have 8 hours of story to fill. You're consequently inevitably going to be focused less on plot and more on characters and relationships, because
Yeah.
that's the way television works, is that people want to follow these characters and relationships as they evolve.
Hmm.
So that was really appealing to me because it was just going to inevitably reinvent it. just by coming to television.
Yeah. So tell me, because what I love as well is that, there is a kind of through line. There is a narrative thread, right, throughout all of these movies. The last time
Yes.
we saw Chucky and Tiffany, they were inhabited by Jennifer Tilly and Fiona Dourif, right?
Right.
Just tell us, does this new television show kind of exist within that universe of the movies? Is it continuing on that narrative?
It definitely continues on that narrative. In fact, when I wrote Cult of Chucky, I deliberately ended the story on a series of cliffhangers with the hope of setting up a TV series, because I knew that a television show with all of this storytelling real estate at our disposal, that would be the perfect opportunity to explore the ramifications of those cliffhangers that you cited. So when we left Chucky, he had splintered his soul into 3 different good guy dolls,
Yeah.
and the body of his new nemesis, Nika Pierce, this young woman. Yes, we do explore all of that. And, so to me, one of the interesting things to explore with Chucky, particularly now that our lead character is a 14-year-old gay boy, Chucky himself obviously must be heading, when he was driving off into that snowstorm with Tiffany, he's heading off into some kind of sexual romantic exploration.
Yeah.
Because now he's in a woman's body. What does that mean? And the idea of blowing people's heads up with that, making Chucky himself sexually fluid.
Yeah.
What does that mean? So yes, we delve into all of this.
And that's another thing I love about it. And it really does feel like, I suppose, from About Bride onwards, I don't know, in your mind, has it always been there that Chucky is a kind of queer horror story, I suppose?
Well, Bride of Chucky was when I started to do it quite consciously.
Yeah.
With the addition of a gay character, but also just with the vibe and tone and aesthetic. And it was even just the casting of Jennifer Tilly and Alexis Arquette, even John Ritter. All of these actors had connections to queer culture one way or another. And even with the aesthetic of that movie, we made it stylized in a new way that I think is consistent with a kind of queer sensibility. So that's when I started doing it consciously. But then looking back on the first 3, I think, well, maybe there was an unconscious thing about having the lead be this, little lonely little boy who wants this boy doll as his best friend. Not to get into anything icky. Obviously, there's nothing sexual about that, but there is, the loneliness of that character of Andy Barclay, which, I think I was drawing on my own experiences as a kid. Even though I wasn't an only child and I didn't have a deceased parent, I still was lonely because I was a gay kid. In the 80s, you couldn't deal with that explicitly yet. Mm-hmm. So I think I'm just like citing the potential that maybe on an unconscious way, it was coded,
And did you find that you had to kind of, because those themes have sort of run throughout, that, alongside Chucky is usually some sort of main character who does seem to be some kind of outsider in some way, right? And that's very present here in the TV show. Did you find that you had to kind of update those themes, I suppose, in 2021 in a world maybe that has maybe changed and become more progressive? Maybe it hasn't. I don't know what you think of that, but since, for example, the 80s.
Well, it certainly has become more progressive, so that the world has evolved so that you can have a 14-year-old queer protagonist in a major TV show. And certainly Chucky isn't the only show where we see that sort of thing, and that's a great thing. But as we see from the content of the show, there's still bullying in the world. There's still, I live in Los Angeles, and it's like one of the most progressive places in the world, but there are huge swaths of our country, in your country as well, where, there's still a lot of homophobia and bullying. So it's still a viable issue to address. And I just thought it was important to give young queer fans a main character to identify with.
And what's brilliant as well is that Chucky, for all of his horrible, horrific, homicidal ways, is a sort of ally type figure, right? In a lot of these movies, there is a lovely conversation, I think, in episode 2, right, where he sort of says to our main character, "Look, I have a child who's queer, who's
Yep.
gender fluid and everything, right?" And there is that sort of, as monstrous as he is, Chucky is this kind of ally in some way, isn't he?
Yeah, he is an ally because, of course, as he says, I mean, he has experience with this himself. I mean, what he's not telling Jake at that time is that he has personal experience with it as well, because part of him is living in the body of a young woman.
Yes.
And, so there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on with Chucky. So he is an ally, but at the same time, he's manipulating Jake. I mean, and hopefully you're asking yourself, like, what's in it for Chucky?
Mm-hmm.
Why is he doing this? And like any bully, he does have his own agenda. And even though he does have his own agenda and he's trying to lead Jake down a very dark path, he is an ally. I mean, Chucky is a psychopathic killer, but he's not a homophobe and he's not a bigot. He's an equal opportunity psychopath. He'll kill anyone. It's like when Tiffany had that line in Bride of Chucky where she says, "I'll kill anyone, but I'll only sleep with someone I love."
Yeah. I've only seen at this point episodes 1 and 2, and I'm presuming that we're going to see Jennifer Tilly or Tiffany at some point, right? I mean, there have been some photos on it.
In the back half of the season, she's a major presence.
Incredible. What about their child as well? What about the seed of Chucky? Are we going to see the child return as well?
We'll just have to wait and see.
I love it. And again, it might be too early to say, but is the plan for this to be a contained miniseries, or could this potentially go on to a second season?
Well, certainly the hope is to go on to a second season. That, the ultimate verdict, of course, is yours.
Yeah.
And all the fans. So please watch it.
Fantastic. Oh, yeah. Well, I absolutely will. I already can't wait to see what happens next. And do you think that you'll return to film at this point, or are you happier with Chucky in this medium?
I want to do both, actually. I'm greedy. I think we want, to create a kind of Chucky multiverse.
Yeah.
So I think that, the television series, hopefully, fingers crossed, can continue on, but that doesn't preclude movies coming out as well. And we do have some plans for that.
Don, do you have a kind of ranking in your head of like your favorite to least favorite in terms of the 7 Chucky movies?
My favorites, I think, are Bride and Curse.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that like the by far the consensus fan favorite is Child's Play 2. People loved the tone of that movie and the relationship between Andy and Kyle, his foster sister. But I think they also loved the look of Chucky in that movie. That has been something that fans have always cited. So I do love Child's Play 2, but I think my favorites are Bride and Curse, partly because both of those represented successful reinventions of the franchise. And they were sort of gambles. So like we didn't know if it would work, but they did.
Where would you go beyond those top 3, do you think, in your rankings?
Well, I love all my children.
I know.
So, I've said publicly before that Child's Play 3 was my least favorite. I mean, that movie, Child's Play 3 came out 9 months after Child's Play 2, and I was just frankly kind of tired, I think.
Yeah.
Even though I tried to reinvent it by advancing Andy's age and putting in a military school, I think there was something a little bit tired. But I also think it was a blessing in disguise, is because that movie was the least successful at the box office of all of them. It was kind of a wake-up call. So I realized this is getting stale. You have to reinvent it in a much bigger way. And all of that said, I do meet people who love Child's Play 3, and there are aspects of that movie that I really do like.
Yeah, what's really interesting, I remember growing up, I don't know if you remember, but here in the UK, Child's Play 3 had a real reputation. It was kind of blamed for real-life crime. Like, ridiculously, it was kind of blamed by tabloids for a real-life crime that happened. So growing up in the UK, Child's Play 3 had this kind of mystique around it almost, as it was going to be the darkest and most harmful of all the Chucky movies, you know. So that's really interesting.
It's so not in a way that when you look at it, and there's something that's like, I think one of the problems about it is, I would say it's probably the least scary of all of them. There's just something almost routine about it. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but there was just, again, I just think it was the concept and the writing.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, final question for you. I mean, you've touched upon this already, Don, but before we go, I just need to ask you, you know, please never stop bringing Chucky back. And what is the future for Chucky after this series?
Well, fingers crossed, another season of this TV show. I mean, I love it. I really love television. Since I first started, I did an episode of Tales from the Crypt for HBO, like, I was going to say a million years ago, but it's 30 years ago, so it might as well be a million years. But my first real experience with the TV writer's room situation was with Hannibal and then Channel Zero. And I really loved it. And so I'm still relatively new to TV, and I'm really loving it. Just the specific challenges of that format. It's new. So as long as you guys want more, I'm happy to do it.
Looking for more horror content? Subscribe now for more videos like this one, and listen to the Evolution of Horror podcast. Head on over to evolutionofhorror.com.